Welcome to the Visionary Chronicles, a podcast dedicated to uncovering the strategies and insights that drive innovative, disruptive businesses. Join us as we explore the mindsets, cultures, and solutions powering the next generation of industry leaders and creative trailblazers. Whether you're seeking to inject new life into your organization or spark transformative growth, the Visionary Chronicles is your guide to executable, cutting-edge business strategy. Hello and welcome to the Visionary Chronicles. Appreciate you being with me today. Today we're going to talk about visionary leadership and the short-term versus long-term strategic thinking that we face today and the culture we have in business. So I entitled today the Visionary Leadership, Implementing Long-Term Strategy in a Short-Term Culture. So welcome to the Visionary Chronicles. Again, appreciate you being with me today. We'll dive into some principles and practices that really distinguish truly transformational leaders from those who merely maintain the status quo in our industry. So today we're going to, tackle one of the most critical challenges facing business leaders, and quite frankly, it's one of the challenges I often hear most from the leaders that we work with on Liquid Mind, the business strategy firm that I run out here in Southern California. And what I find is that this long-term strategy isn't always well thought out or structured, or many times it will never be achieved because of the short-term aspect of our culture that we live in today. Everybody has a short-term vision, and nobody has a long-term strategy. So I thought it was just something that was very interesting, and it's really timely today. And both public companies that we work with, as well as private companies, entrepreneurs, everybody faces the same thing. Everybody wants to think about the short term and sacrificing the long-term strategies that come along to it. So we're going to tackle that issue. It's how to implement what I call this genuine long-term strategy. So hopefully you'll get something out of this that will be extremely useful for you, that you can use in your current environment that I'm sure most of you are in today. We do face that, a long-term strategy in a culture that's really what I call addicted to short-term results. And, these quarterly earnings reports, real-time social media, instant feedback, daily stock fluctuations, It's really crazy, the world that we live in, and everything pushes leaders towards this short-term thinking. And businesses aren't built that way. At least generational ones are not built that way. You really need someone at the top that has this vision, long-term vision, of where you want to take the company. But their skin is very thin. And again, I kind of say this, knowing and having worked with so many companies, with Liquid Mind as well as for so many companies back in the day when I was punching a W-2. And it's really a challenge, But what I find is the companies that have created the most value over the generations are those visionaries who refused to embrace this pressure. And it's tough. It's difficult. So hopefully today I can give you some pointers and ones that, again, it's a very challenging environment to be in, but I can tell you the results if you stick towards your long-term vision, this future casting of where you want to take your brand, you'll be rewarded. And, a couple examples are, Jeff Bezos with Amazon. He really prioritized this long-term market leadership over short-term profitability. And he absolutely got crucified for it. And, he has the bumps and bruises and scrapes to show. And William Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway, thinking in decades, not quarters. And Steve Jobs implemented a vision initially Wall Street hated, but made Apple into the most valuable company on the planet. So today we'll explore this, why this long-term thinking remains the ultimate competitive advantage if you can stick to it. And provide some concrete strategies. It's only as good as your ability to implement some strategies in order to execute that long-term strategy. for building and executing a long-term vision, even when everyone focuses on next quarter's numbers. So hopefully you'll find this useful in your culture. And I call this, the short-term culture crisis that we live in today. So the pressure for immediate results isn't just a sign of leadership failure. It's built into modern business structures. Many people think of it as a leadership failure when it's truly not. It's just part of the culture. And your job as a leader is to change that culture, knowing that example after example in the real world is that short-term strategic thinking never, ever empowers someone to exclude long-term strategic thinking. And the latter is the one that's built the generational brands that we all know of today. And public companies face quarterly earnings expectations. I get it. And private equity imposes aggressive exit timelines. Venture capital demands rapid growth metrics. Social media amplifies every misstep and requires immediate responses. So there's all kinds of barriers that are put in front of you in the real world that we live in, challenging you to stay true to your long-term strategy and vision. Our entire culture has shifted towards immediacy. I think the attention span now is 2 seconds. I may be overemphasizing that, but I think it's a true number that what we're looking at today is one that people don't look towards the long term. They want immediate satisfaction in everything you do. We expect 2-day shipping and now 1-day shipping overnight, hourly shipping, instant answers, real-time updates through AI. This infiltrates how we think about business success as well. A CEO saying this investment pays off in 5 years faces a lot of skepticism today. But really, when you look at it, it's a long-term strategy, not short-term success. A strategy that fails to produce within the first, let's say, 18 months after saying that is labeled a failure, even though the CEO clearly outlined it was a 5-year vision. So when we look at this short-term thinking, what are those hidden costs? Things that you can kind of hang your hat on as you talk to your executive team, and or if you are the executive, you need to do some introspective on. The first is systematic underinvestment in innovation, R&D, and new capabilities of your company, brand, process, or product. The second thing is the talent drain as a result. Top employees seek inspiring long-term missions, not just short-term investments. And your vulnerability to disruption from long-term thinking competitors, those who are thinking long-term. That's just a matter of time. If you don't have an innovation pipeline from a product perspective, then it's just a matter of time before somebody overtakes you with a disruptive innovation because of their long-term thinking and strategy. And the next is loss of organizational identity beyond financial metrics. What it is it's a culture. You need to flip that culture from short-term thinking, risk-adverse strategies to long-term structure. And why this long-term thinking works is, despite the pressures towards what I call short-termism, the evidence is really overwhelming. Companies with genuine long-term orientation consistently outperform their peers. Let me give you a McKinsey study found that long-term focused companies generated 47% more revenue growth and 36% more earnings growth than short-term competitors. But even with that, these executives still refuse to embrace long-term strategy. So why does long-term thinking create an advantage? These are things you're going to need to have in your weapon belt when you go in there and are facing these barriers and challenges from your team. First, it enables compound growth effects, strategic investments in capabilities, culture, and market position. They really compound over time, and they create enormous advantages over your competitors. Second, it reduces competitive pressure, since most competitors won't sacrifice for long-term payoffs. Third, it attracts exceptional talent because you have a vision and you're authentic and you're sticking to your vision no matter what the circumstances or barriers that are put in front of you. They want meaningful missions, not quarterly optimization. And finally, it enables true innovation, which almost never pays off immediately, even though people would like to. So, what are some of the strategic advantages as you look forward into this long-term strategic implementation? One is it creates enhanced brand equity and customer loyalty because you're authentic. There are customers that are anticipating new products, new processes. Whatever your core expertise is, it's the anticipation of you being a leader in your industry that enhances the brand equity through customer loyalty. Customer lifetime value is the gold standard for companies that have sequential growth. And you'll also have people lining up outside your door. I remember when we were going through recessions or people were complaining about not having enough employees. I said, great brands, generational brands, never, ever have a shortage of employees that gravitate towards their company and brand. By the way, they're the best of the best as well because they understand the culture that's been developed inside of the company, and it's spread by word of mouth and also through authentic communications through the brand and leader themselves that stick to the vision. And they also have the freedom to innovate without immediate ROI pressure put on them. They're put in this safe box. The ability for them to innovate with freedom is a key to successful disruption in your industry. Number 4 is you have competitive insulation as your rivals chase your quarterly results. It's just a continual and perpetual machine that exceeds expectations through quarterly results, semi-annual, annual, and for decades. And you have greater resilience during economic downturns. You have an economic and product pipeline of innovation that you've built over time that doesn't evaporate after the first 6 months, as most companies do. And they're called commodity companies, not brands. So when you look at this long-term strategy, what are the 5 pillars of implementation that you need to look at? So, based on studying companies that have successfully maintained this long-term focus, there's really 5 pillars that I've seen which emerge in each one of these companies' brands, products, or services. These are practical systems leaders can implement regardless of their circumstances. So don't think because you're a paper company, footwear, apparel, or whatever it may be, that you can't implement these pillars. You can. Pillar number 1 is governance and stakeholder management. The foundation really for all of this is governance structures that protect long-term interests from short-term pressures. It's really building an internal structure and culture with your executive team first that then trickles down into the balance of the company. You need board members who understand patient capital and will defend strategic investments when results aren't immediate. Amazon shareholder letters are master classes in this type of communication. Bezos consistently explained what Amazon was building, why it required patient investment, and how success would be measured over years, not months. For private companies, this involves in structuring ownership to protect their long-term strategy. For leaders within organizations, this means building relationships with really key decision makers who can protect strategic investments long-term. And some of the key strategies to implement this are recruiting board members committed to long-term value creation. And that's the key, long-term and value. In creating a process that they stick to this, that they don't change, that they have to implement this process and this key strategy. Set clear expectations about time horizons with all stakeholders. And established accountability mechanisms independent of quarterly reviews. And maybe even change those reviews to semi-annual. I've seen teams do that, as companies do that as well. A little harder with public companies, but with private entities, it's much easier. Pillar number 2 is resource allocation and real financial discipline to implement this. When you look at resource allocation, it's where strategy becomes real. Many strategic plans fail because when budget time comes, resources flow to whatever's urgent rather than what is strategic. How many of you seen that? One powerful approach is this 2-bucket budgeting: operating budget for current business, strategic investment budget separately allocated and measured on different time horizons from the organic inline process. Another critical element to this is maintaining financial reserves that provide this flexibility for strategic investments. And I'll give you an example of this. Is when COVID hit, many people did what I call the ostrich syndrome, as they put their head in the sand, and when they came out, they hoped that everything was okay, versus those that were road runners and decided to seize opportunities as they came up within their industry and leapfrog over their competition while others were down. And so it's really this risk-adverse companies that are the short-term thinkers. So when you look at this, you need that companies with minimal cash buffers have no choice but to optimize for the short term. They can't afford investments with delayed payouts. So that's why you need the financial reserves for strategic investments and the patience to make sure that they get commercialized. So some of the best practices that you'll see in implementing this resource allocation and ensuring their financial discipline are separate strategic investment buckets from operational budgets. So the SG&A side of it versus strategic investments are separated. You create multi-year budget commitments for strategic investments. You maintain cash reserves adequate to weather any downturn on the strategic investments based on that budgeting over the long term. And you protect strategic investments from annual budget cuts. Those are the sacred cows that never get cut. Unless you're seeing something that just can't be commercialized and or doesn't have a market. And the last is you track resource allocation by strategic priority, not just by department. You need the right people in order to execute a long-term strategy. Now, number 3 is measurement and accountability systems. Now, this is probably the one I find when I talk to leaders, pillar number 3, is where they have the most challenge with, to understand the accountability and measurement systems behind what they're looking to achieve long term. So they can keep what they call keep the wolves at bay. They want to keep the barbarians at the gate and not enter the kingdom. So if you only measure quarterly financial results, you'll get short-term behavior regardless of the stated commitment to long-term strategy. So you need measurement systems tracking progress towards strategic goals over appropriate time horizons. Really, the solution is developing leading indicators, ones that kind of foretell where you're going and where you've been, and predicting future strategic success. If your strategy involves becoming an innovation leader, leading indicators might include things such as patent applications, revenue from these new products, innovation culture scores, strategic partnerships and technical workforce credentials where they've done cross-training in specific disciplines that will move them ahead in the technological curve. So what do the frameworks look like for this inside of a company to execute this? First is you create a multi-year strategic dashboard, which is reviewed regularly. Second is you include strategic milestone achievement and executive compensation. So they're incentivized to stick with these strategic long-term investments. And then you extend equity vesting to align with long-term performance and establish clear accountability for strategic outcomes. Number 4 is organizational culture and leadership development. really, when you're looking at this structure, you need to ensure the culture changes. So the strategy succeeds or fails based on thousands of daily decisions that you come across. If culture rewards the short-term wins and punishes strategic patience, long-term strategy inside of your company, regardless of the vision that you have, will fail, regardless of your commitment. This starts with leadership selection and development. You want to promote leaders that demonstrate strategic thinking and long-term orientation. Create development experiences building strategic capability within your organization. Make strategic thinking an explicit competency in your leadership selection and assessments as you move forward. Ensure they understand what it means and the commitment that's required. Make sure they have the thick skin to be authentic and establish a vision and stick with it. Cultural change also requires adjusting tolerance for failure. I said, risk-averse companies are not generational. Safe is risky, but also safe is expensive because you're putting your company at risk relative to your competitors. Long-term strategy really involves uncertainty, and some incentives will fail. Initiatives will fail. If culture punishes, if your culture really punishes failure harshly, people avoid necessary strategic risks. They just don't want to do it. Why do it? You're basically walking a plank. I was in business development with many global iconic brands, and I always took the business development role because it was one that was the riskiest, of course, but it was also one that had the most reward and the most high profile inside of a company. It's a little bit like being a pirate. You know, I thought the flagship that Steve put out during the Macintosh development days was perfect. You're a pirate. You're walking the plank every day for your job. So what are these cultural strategies that you need to develop inside of your company to execute this? One is you create development programs focused on strategic capability. Number two is you tell stories reinforcing long-term thinking and strategic patience. You've got all kinds of stories of generational brands and companies that have had long-term patience through long-term strategic implementation. Number three is you establish innovation time, allowing strategic idea pursuit. You create psychological safety, and I say psychological safety because it drives people crazy if you don't stick to your risk-adverse culture and remove the aversion from your risk. If you don't do it, people are afraid to stick their neck out. They're afraid to walk the plank. And as a result, you're not going to have any type of pipeline of innovation for you to surf for ideally an 8 to 10 year time frame. And that's what we look for in Liquid Mind when we're working with our ideation teams, is that on the innovation pipeline, we want to make sure that we have the ability to surf this technology, this product platform, whatever it is, for a 10-year time frame at a minimum. And we're continuing to hit one wave after another, that we don't surf it to the end like a lot of companies have done with their products, and as a result, they go bankrupt. So the last is you build strategic thinking into hiring and onboarding. So this is something that HR needs to be aware of as well. If it's somebody that's in a strategic role, a visionary inside of your company, and you're emboldened to your competitors that are thinking strategic long-term and have the investment and the executive team that commit themselves to ensuring they'll always stay ahead of the competition, you have a long road in front of you. And until you build an executive team that has the same culture, the same mentality, the same authentication, you will continue to go down the path of short-term culture and thinking. And last is pillar number 5, which is competitive positioning and external communications. How you position long-term strategy externally and manage competitive dynamics is really super critical. Long-term strategy often telegraphs intentions to competitors who can respond. Apple is the king of maintaining extreme secrecy until ready to execute their plan at retail. Tesla publicly announced unbelievable, or they call audacious, goals that seemed impossible, discouraging competitors from taking them seriously until too late. So you also need these competitive, what I'll call moats, where they can't cross it short term. They have to cross it long term, which protects your long-term strategy. If you'll invest years building capabilities, you need advantages. Preventing competitors from simply copying once it proves successful. Network effects, proprietary technology, brand equity, or switching costs, whatever it is, make it part of your long-term strategy and part of your culture. So what do these positioning tactics look like? You need to develop competitive moats, protecting strategic investments. Number 2 is you need bold commitments to shape market expectations. And you really need to monitor competitor responses and then adapt if needed. So these are really competitive positioning tactics you need in a long-term strategy culture. And I'll give you a quick case study. Microsoft on their transformation, Satya Nadella, gives you a great example of implementing a long-term strategy. When Satya, became CEO of Microsoft 2014, he was trapped in this short-term thinking culture and obsessively protecting Windows and Office revenue while missing cloud, mobile, and AI shifts. So what Nadella did was he redefined Microsoft's mission to what he called empower every person in every organization on the planet to achieve more. Think of the broad boundaries that he's putting out there with that statement. He told investors Microsoft would prioritize long-term cloud market share over short-term profitability. He worked with his board to secure commitments, protecting strategic investments. Now, if Microsoft can do it, you can do it. It doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a small cap company, large cap company, whatever it may be, you can do this as well. He invested billions in Azure before profitability. He acquired LinkedIn for $26 billion, despite, by the way, skepticism, and allocated massive resources to AI. And look where they are today. The leaders in each one of these categories beyond where they were in the past because of their short-term strategy and thinking. He shifted key metrics from Windows licensing to cloud adoption. He promoted Azure growth and Microsoft 365 subscribers. And by the way, here's another key component to this, is that compensation was rewarded based on strategic contributions rather than just business unit performance. He wanted people that were innovators. He wanted people that were thinkers. And as a result of it, he rewarded that proactive management. So culturally, he shifted from know-it-all to learn-it-all, promoted collaborative leaders, and killed stack ranking performance management. What are the results? Pretty impressive. Microsoft market cap increased from $300 billion in 2014 to over $3 trillion by 2024, a decade. Remember what I said earlier, and we were coming to this. What was the time frame that I was recommending on product innovation pipeline? Surfing this for 8 to 10 years. Satya had this long-term thinking when he first came in the door for a 10-year strategy, and look what was achieved. Not short-term thinking. The required years of patient investment and strategic discipline were required, and he was able to achieve it. So how do you maintain this strategic discipline? Launching a long-term strategy is really challenging, but maintaining discipline over years is even harder. Initial enthusiasm fades, quality pressures persist, leadership attention gets pulled to crisis mode. This is where most strategies I found fail, not in conception, but in sustained execution. And I love that because you can have what I call this one-hit wonder, but unless you have anything beyond an incremental improvement, an innovation, a disruption, it's a one-hit wonder, and it's not a sustained product development strategy. So maintaining discipline requires systematic practices, quarterly strategic reviews, annual strategic retreats, regular communication keeping strategy alive, disciplined resource allocation, and continuous leadership development. It also requires personal discipline from leaders. You'll face this intense pressure. That's a given. To abandon the strategy when the results aren't immediate or people can't see the future like you can. And this goes back to The Visionary Leader, the book I just wrote, where every visionary I profile in the book was facing people that were short-term thinkers versus long-term strategic visionaries. There's so few of them that you face constant barriers of short-term thinking because people cannot see what you can see. So that's going to be your issue as you continue to develop, maintain, and build a long-term strategic culture. And what I've given you also is, and I'm going to put these in the notes, I'm not going to go through one by one, but I'm going to give you a 90-day action plan. I'm going to give you days 1 through 30, which is an assessment. I'm going to give you days 31 actually through 60, which is the design. And days 61 through 90 is launch. And I've got about 4 to 5 bullet points on each one of these. So again, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but these will be in the podcast notes that I'll send. And if you didn't receive them, please let me know at Brian Smeltzer, or Brian at liquidmindsight.com. It's BRYAN at liquidmindsite.com, LIQUIDMINDSITE.com, or info at liquidmindsight.com, and one of our team members will get back to you with this. But this will be in the podcast notes, and it'll be something that will be available to you. So in closing, we live in this what I call this short-term culture, as we all know, which constant pressure towards immediate results in everything. So the solution isn't ignoring short-term realities, it's developing capability to succeed short-term while building for long-term strategic success. That's really what you're looking to do. This is a visionary leader's fundamental challenge and opportunity. Anyone can manage quarter results. Only the few visionary leaders create enduring value by implementing long-term strategic strategy despite short-term culture. This capability separates those good leaders from the great ones, the visionaries. The framework we've discussed, governance, resource allocation, measurement, culture, and competitive positioning, provides what I call this really systematic approach to this challenge. And you're going to really need to have this systematic approach. Every brand I've been with, every brand we work with on the Liquid Mind side in implementing this strategy, there's always a systematic approach. There's a step-by-step approach. You don't want to throw everything in at once. But ultimately implementing a long-term strategy requires courage. And courage is a pretty strong word, but really courage to make investments others question, courage to persist when results aren't immediate, courage to believe in futures others cannot see. So the companies and leaders who make this trait create disproportionate value. And you can see it with generational companies. They build organizations that matter. They innovate and they endure for the long term. And people and those that are inside of these brands and companies have a passion around it as well. They attract the best talent, create loyal customers, and generate the greatest returns for their investors. But most importantly, they create meaning and impact, extending far beyond any quarterly report. So I want to thank you for joining me again for the Visionary Chronicles. Start with, if you could, this 90-day action plan that I outlined. We discussed, and there'll be bullet points there for you. Days 1 through 30, 31 through 60, 61 through 90. It gives you a roadmap for implementing this long-term strategic approach that these generational brands have implemented and successfully executed. And building credibility through results and gradually expanding strategic ambition by doing this. So subscribe to, if you like what we're talking about, subscribe to, we're going to continue to explore these, what I call these current day subjects and things that people are most concerned with or have questions about. So we'll continue enabling and empowering visionary leaders. So until next time, think long, act decisively, and never stop building towards the future that you envision. And some key takeaways you'll get from not only the copy that I put in this, but also through the Visionary Leader, the Success Principles of the World's Greatest Visionaries, the book I've just released. Some key takeaways today are think about implementing long-term strategy. It really requires systematic changes across 5 pillars. Remember these. 1 is governance. Number 2 is resource allocation. Number 3 is measurement. Number 4 is culture. And number 5 is competitive positioning, combined with personal discipline to maintain strategic focus despite constant short-term pressure. That's really, in a nutshell, what we're talking about today. So if this episode resonated with you, I'd really encourage you to grab a copy of my new book, The Visionary Leader, The Success Principles of the World's Greatest Visionaries. It's available now, and it is an Amazon #1 on the business genre. So thank you for those that supported the book, purchased the book or the ebook. And this is one that it's a perfect companion, really, for if you're looking to kind of reignite your purpose or lead with more clarity in a super complex world. And to thank you for those podcast listeners as well. We're going to maintain that $1.99 ebook price on Amazon. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on that as well. And this book is really a culmination of decades of research that I've had, both companies I've worked with or for, and also read about, experiences and real-world insights into what makes leaders like Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci, Abraham Lincoln, Elon Musk. It's a very broad, all the way back to Jesus, through Socrates, all the way up to Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. What makes these guys and gals actually, with Marie Curie and Amelia Earhart, it's a broad selection of visionaries. It was really difficult to find all the ones that I profiled. I probably could have had a 1,000-page book. But I felt these were the ones that impacted the generations the most. So your support really means the world to me, and your purchase goes a long way in helping us spread the vision even further. And for those that did purchase the book, thank you. Those that are going to be purchasing the book, thank you as well. I appreciate that. But really, it's those that get the book and then reach back out to me saying how they've applied it to their day-to-day, both on a personal and professional level. So again, thank you for joining me on the Visionary Chronicles today, where the future is created by those bold enough to shape it. Until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, keep shaping the future. Thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. As always, I say stay true, stay authentic, be different, be great, but enjoy the journey along the way, and I look forward to the next vision.